For over 4 decades, Denzel Washington has played morally complex characters with as much intensity as they have swagger. With 2 Oscars to his name,
Denzel Washington,
and an upcoming take on Macbeth currently sitting at 100% on the tomato meter, it's safe to say
King Kong ain't got shit on me!
Join us today while we celebrate the wins and the losses from one of the most legendary screen icons of all time. This is the best and the worst of Denzel Washington. Hey everybody, welcome back to the best and the worst, and today we're talking Denzel Washington and Training Day. It's been 20 years since it's come out, so that means we're going to be breaking down the best and the worst of Denzel once we talk about how much we love Training Day. Ben, you love Training Day.
I'm a big fan from the director of Training Day. Look, this is a movie that holds a special place in my heart. We're going to talk a little bit about how we first perceived this movie when we first watched it, and of course what everybody else thought about this movie when it came out. A lot on today's show. There's so much to say about Denzel's career, man. It's a crazy, crazy career to break down.
This was probably the hardest episode we've done yet in terms of figuring out the actual best and the worst. He's done so many movies, and I think what we realized is he doesn't have a lot of outliers. I mean, there's a lot of really great films, and there's only a handful of bad ones, but there's not just like, oh yeah, this is definitely the number one, and this is definitely the worst movie he's ever done in his almost 50 films. So before we get into that conversation, before we talk about Training Day and Denzel, this is our 5th episode. We're still rocking 5 stars.
Yes, we are.
Still got it. Got some new ratings, new reviews. What's the best way for people to support what we're doing here, man?
Yeah, if you guys want to support the best and the worst, there's a couple great ways to do it. The first one, if you go find the Podcasts app, it's probably on your phone, maybe it's on your computer. Go and leave us a rating, 5 stars preferably. If you felt it was 4 stars, leave that as well. They all help. Also, leave a review on that same app. Just a couple words. Did you like the episode? And if you hated the episode, let us know also. Got to just cover all our bases here. And, of course, the last thing you can do is subscribe to the podcast here or follow on Spotify. Or if you'd like to watch on YouTube, youtube.com/Action Industries. You'll get these episodes every single week, but video is 1 week later than audio. So be sure to subscribe on audio if you want to get the goods right when they are first available.
Yep, and these goods are available right now, man. Training Day, 20 years later, and we're going to start this episode the exact same way we start every single episode, which is, what's the first thing that you think of when you think of Training Day?
First thing I think of is I have a sick urge to start rapping lyrics from songs.
Please, God, do
off
not
of the Chronic,
do that.
the 2001 album. I
think about you being 13 in Washington and me being 13 in Oregon, listening to the Chronic 2001 in our bedrooms.
Yes.
And thinking that we were cool.
I thought I was so cool.
There's like if you open up the little like booklet inside,
Yeah.
there's a picture of, I think, Dre and Snoop smelling like this gigantic bag of weed.
Yeah.
I didn't know what it was, and I kept asking my mom, and she also didn't know what it was. So, a little aside about me and the Chronic 2001.
Yeah, my memory, and it's funny because when I say that's what I think of, there's a couple reasons. First of all, one of the great scenes in this film is, of course, the scene when the song Still Dre plays. Mm-hmm. It's great. It's classic. You know, that was one of the big singles off of that album. You also have Dre in this movie as an actor, Snoop in this movie as an actor, Exhibits in this movie.
Yep.
That album,
who all show up on that album,
yeah,
obviously.
They are all, I mean, like, they're so synonymous. It's almost impossible to think about Training Day without feeling like that was almost the motion picture soundtrack, even though, of course, they were separate, but
right.
I think they did come out the same year.
Yeah, I think the Chronic was 2000, obviously. Training Day's 2001, but it basically felt like the exact same time, the same moment in time. For me, what's weird is when I think about Training Day now, overrated pops in my mind.
Yeah. Which
is crazy because, right, it's the second Oscar win for Denzel. A lot of people thought he should have won it either the year before that or the year before that, right, with Remember and Hurricane. I liked this movie a lot more on my first viewing than I think I do now. I think this movie's actually like pretty overrated. And it's funny, you actually likened it to one of my favorite films of all time, Gladiator.
Yeah.
When you went back and watched it as a 30-plus-year-old adult, you were like, you know what? These movies were held to such high regard when they came out. Now when I'm watching them, I can let go of all of that and just go, okay, this is a fun, kind of dumb action movie. Because, like, Gladiator is not like a historical epic that's like kind of a biopic, that's kind of a documentary
right.
that talks about things that really happened, that's totally grounded in reality. Like, I love Gladiator, but it's just a sweet-ass action movie that happened back then. It feels kind of like Training Day is that for 2001.
Yeah, 100%, because the best parts of Training Day are just great popcorn movie making. The lead character, Alonzo, played, of course, by Denzel, inspired by a real police officer, but still, he plays this character he has such a good time. Like, when people talk about actors chewing up the scenery, that is him every single time he's in it. He's just commanding every scene. And it does feel like this movie is just a script that was written to feature Denzel being Denzel at his most Denzelishness or whatever.
Totally, yeah. I mean, it's weird when you talk about the way he chews up the scene, chews up the scenery. It's like, he really does. Every single scene you're watching him and him only. I mean, Ethan Hawke is there, and a lot of other people there's a lot of moving parts going on in this movie, but you're always waiting for the next line from Denzel. So it's weird. Like, do you think that this should have been his Oscar win? Like, do you think he should have gotten an Oscar for this because, like, no one else could have done what he does in this movie?
It's really weird because I actually think there's probably a ton of actors at this time that whose names we just didn't know that could have played this role.
Yeah.
Because it's not actually that challenging of a role. You have to have kind of a swagger and a confidence and a charisma. Versus Malcolm X, I think you're talking about almost nobody else in the world.
Like no one, probably no other great actor could have done that.
In 1992, that's like, you the perfect combination of actor and character is probably that. On the other hand, I'm offhandedly talking about movie star charisma as though being a black actor with that kind of charisma in 2001 was something common. Of course it wasn't. He was the only guy.
I mean, being any actor with that level of charisma that he has in that movie, I mean, because he's through and through the bad guy, but you're rooting for him the whole time, but then you're also rooting for him to lose. It's weird when you actually kind of break it down scientifically. It does feel like maybe we are a bit more critical on this movie than we should be, because, like, I don't know, for some reason when you said the way he chews up the scenery, and I think about the scenes in my mind, it is true. He's just like, he is so in his element in that movie, and I really don't know if any other people could have done it as well as he did. So talking about Training Day for a moment, talking about the best things about this movie, what is your fist pump moment from Training Day?
God, there's honestly so many, but I think for me, it's got to be the same one. We did an episode of Action Movie Anatomy specifically about Training Day years ago. It was an hour about Training Day. Yeah. And I remember my fist pump moment then is the same as my fist pump now. Okay. And it's when Ethan Hawke gets in the car with him, and he's like, he looks around and he's like, "Oh, this certainly isn't from the company motor pool," or something. He says some dumb thing like that. And he's like, "I thought we were going to the office." And Denzel's like, "You in the office, baby, going up." And then like Still Dre starts and the hydraulics kick up. And you're just like, oh, like this man is in charge right now. Like there's just, there's like nobody else. That's the moments where you're like, that's why you won the Oscar, because I'm just like, I want to hang out with you, man.
Yeah, you want to be on that ride. Yeah. Right? You just want to be on it.
This car is not from the motor pool. No, it's not. Sexy though, isn't it? So where's the office? Back at Division? You in the office, baby. Going up.
So I have two fist pumps, and it's funny because one of them is the very end when he finally dies. Yeah. There's two parts of that. It's because it's like, finally, thank God, because it felt like he was like a cockroach that would never go away. Yeah. But then also the way that he dies, he shot like 500 times against the side of his car, and I always think about like acting that out and how fun it would have been. But I also really love the when they rob. It's not Scott Glenn. Yeah, it is Scott Glenn. They rob Scott Glenn. I like that scene. I think it's probably the best like high tension scene in the movie of like all the stuff that's going around, all the moving parts, his dialogue with him back and forth. But yeah, it's one of those two. I think the first one is more of just like just fun to watch, and it makes me like feel like I'm having a good time. But if we're talking like true fist pump, this is the moment where you're watching it and you feel like, oh my God, I gotta watch the rest of this movie. That is it for me. It's when he kills Scott Glenn with the shotgun. You're like, oh shit. Yeah, right. That's what's going down right now.
Well, because also that's one of the most important dynamics in the whole movie, is because when you first meet Scott Glenn's character in the first part of the movie, he's like Denzel's friend, and and you kind of don't even realize totally what's going on. Roger, that's the character's name. You don't even remember what's really going on until the movie gets later in. You're like, oh, this guy's gonna turn his back on literally anybody. Like there is just no question he's going to do whatever is best for him. And it is like, there is this sort of boiling point nature of this movie where as it goes, you can feel the water rising on Denzel the whole time. Mm-hmm. It's like, how's he going to get out of this now? These people want to kill him. These people want to kill him. So,
and his feels like more of like a slow earned, like build as
Yeah.
opposed to like, you know, I know that I like the scene more than you,
Yeah.
but the bathtub scene with
Yeah.
Ethan Hawke and you know, like the fact that the gangster's cousin is the girl that he
Yeah.
saved earlier in the day and he still has her wallet or whatever. Like, I remember you thinking that was kind of like a bit of a stretch, a bit of a reach.
Yeah, I definitely still do. It's like, it's probably the scene in the movie when it happens where you're just like, but like we're supposed
how?
to, yeah, we're supposed to believe this is like that level of coincidental. And all I could really come up with was Denzel has like the certain routes that he probably goes on that like are his comfortable places where he knows people. And so that maybe that's the route that they're on. And he's driven past this girl a bunch of times because like maybe those guys were in that neighborhood sometimes. Like that's that sort of a thing.
Yeah, and I think that's actually kind of a perfect segue into the next like conversation that we started a little bit at the beginning, which was like Training Day then versus Training Day now. Training Day, the movie, versus from the director of Training Day, Antoine Fuqua.
I mean, let's call it what it is here. He makes Training Day, followed by Tears of the Sun, followed by King Arthur. Like, Antoine Fuqua, he, like, lived on Training Day for most of his entire career. Shooter a couple years after that.
When Southpaw came out, it was still
From the director of Training
from
Day.
the director of Training Day.
Yes.
From the director of Training Day.
And I think that's a really funny thing you point out because like one of them is legacy and one of them is what you actually got.
Yeah.
And like to kind of wrap it back around to what you were just talking about, the first time I saw that scene when I was a kid,
Yeah.
I was like, oh my God, he got out of it. Like, how on earth did he actually get out of this?
Yeah.
Oh, that's what you get for being a good cop and an
Yeah,
honest
yeah, yeah.
man, like all that. But then I get older and I'm more jaded and I know how big LA is now that I've lived here for 10 years. I feel like those moments hit me a little bit less in an effective way and more of like the same way that you were talking about in Gladiator. It's like, all right, this is kind of just like a throwaway action thriller that I don't need to give too much credit to because of the accolades behind it, but
Yeah.
I just need to sit back and have fun on this ride.
Well,
Listen to Still Dre.
One thing that's really interesting about this, and I want to fact check myself on this right now, but I'm almost positive this film is written by David Ayer. And
that's right.
Because David Ayer wrote like 5 of these Los Angeles crime movies in his career. You know, End of Watch was one of them. Street Kings was one of them. The one with Harsh Times was one of them. Dark Blue,
Yeah, it's David
this
Ayer.
one. So he wrote like all of these movies that are all based in Los Angeles with crime and like some amount of like, you know, Latino background characters who were like pretty tough, pretty
Yeah.
rough and tumble. And that's like a theme in all the movies that he wrote.
Yep.
If you compared Training Day to any of the other movies I just mentioned, all the rest of those movies are considered to be maybe above average,
We
but
used to joke about Harsh Times so much in college.
yeah, like they're all considered to be like above average but kind of forgettable crime movies.
Yeah.
This movie's Oscar win is what elevates it. If it didn't have the Oscar win, you would think of Training Day as the best of those 5, but not that far above any of the rest of them.
That's a really good point you make. I do wonder if Denzel did not win the Oscar, if we would talk about this, because a lot of it was like the controversial talk around the Oscar is like, it feels like the Oscar at that moment was almost more of a Lifetime Achievement Award, which he ends up winning in 2016 anyway. But it was more of like, you've done all this work, you've done so many things that you've gotten the nod for, but you haven't actually won for other than glory. And then he wins for Training Day, which is like, it's really a tale of 2 Oscars.
Yeah.
Right? Like, you look at him playing this angry, I guess, I can't remember exactly if he's, yes, he was a slave turned soldier, whereas like other people in that movie were like never slaves. But yeah, he's one of the black soldiers, one of the first black soldiers in an all-black regiment that is run by Matthew Broderick in Glory. And he wins the Oscar for that scene when he's being flogged for deserting. And it's a really, really powerful scene. It's a powerful performance. He's a very, like, angry dude at the beginning of the movie that has charisma, and then by the end of it, you feel... You, like, love his journey.
Yeah.
But Training Day is literally the polar opposite of kind of, like, why he won for Training Day as opposed to why he won for Glory.
Well, you know, it's like art imitates life, life imitates art on some level. And so you actually, because Glory is 1989, so we can go back to the 80s and we can talk about other films from the same time period. I mean, for fuck's sake, Driving Miss Daisy won Best Picture that same year. So, like, there is so much more of the white leading character, white I'm losing my mind. The white savior sort of character. That's like an archetype that you see a lot more in the 70s, the 80s, even the 90s.
Yeah.
And so Denzel playing this character and getting an Oscar for a black man getting whipped, that's essentially what you're talking about, right, is so different than what we're going to see today, where some actors, like Aldous Hodge talks about, he will not play those characters.
Right.
Like a lot of black actors now are just like, I'm not going to get pigeonholed into playing a slave, someone who's getting beaten by a white man.
And if you are going to do that, it feels like they've wanted black directors to tell those stories, like with Steve McQueen in 12 Years a Slave, as opposed to Edward Zwick
Yeah.
directing Glory, told through the eyes of Matthew Broderick. I mean, if anything, that movie should have been told through the eyes of Morgan Freeman, not Denzel or Matthew Broderick. But then again, you look at what he did in Glory and that character as opposed to who he is in Training Day, and it feels like two completely different actors.
Yeah, and so when I say what I say a second ago about, art imitating life, life imitating art, it's like, well, Denzel Washington is a pretty fresh actor at this point. He's been around kind of on the radar at this point for just a couple years, and he gets the Oscar in the 80s for playing a character getting whipped, right?
Yeah.
White director. That's something that we saw like a lot more of, whereas I think as times have gone on, I think Denzel would not be happy if he was playing a character like that and won an Oscar today. I think he would say... So I think you can see what happens when he wins the Oscar for Training Day. The second half of his career becomes something entirely different.
Yeah, and we were trying to make a thesis based off of after he wins his second Oscar or once he does Training Day, his career before the 2000s, his career after the 2000s, and I think what we really ended up just deciding for our thesis about, going from Training Day to the discussion about Denzel Washington is just that Denzel Washington is the perfect combination of acting talent and movie star charisma. And Ben, what is movie star charisma if people have never heard us talk about this before?
It's something we started noticing during the few years we did Action Movie Anatomy, because we covered so many action movies, and a lot of those movies are driven by, you have to have a lead character in those movies that you really root for. And you root for them not because they're somebody you believe is a real person, or even because they're giving you the best performance. You just have to like them.
Yeah.
There's a level of movie star charisma that some guys have and some guys just don't. So if you look at Dolph Lundgren, for instance, in the 80s when they tried to make him a movie star,
right,
he never had any movie star charisma. He just didn't.
It's like Jason Clarke recently, or
Yeah.
Sam Worthington. It's like guys that had this opportunity, but they just didn't have that thing that you need to have that makes people want to watch you exist.
Yeah, so it's like you compare Dolph Lundgren to Schwarzenegger at the time. Schwarzenegger had only movie star charisma. He had nothing else to offer.
Right. He one of the best things about him is just his complete commitment to saying words that he can't really say.
Exactly. So I think if you look at Denzel from 1984 to 2001, you see a lot of performances that are 75% like him earning that moment, like acting, true acting. He's trying to differentiate every character he plays. Mm-hmm. He's really going for it. And it's phenomenal stuff. You watch Training Day Forward and it's like, every fourth movie, he kind of goes for that. But 3 out of 4, it's just movie star charisma, and I'll give you 25%. I'll do my Denzel thing for a few scenes, but otherwise, I'm just going to exist.
It felt like for the first, 25 years, because he first started working in 75, right? But then he really starts being noticeable in the early 80s. It feels like for the first 20-ish years of his career, he was using his talent. Obviously, the charisma was there. There's a reason we're paying attention, but the talent alone was just next leveling and next leveling and next leveling until he got to this point in the 90s and the 2000s where it was just like, I'm fucking Denzel Washington.
Yeah, I mean, there used to be that podcast, Denzel Washington is the greatest actor of all time, period. I can't remember. I think it's a title like that.
Right.
But they, in the later episodes, once they had covered 20 or 30 of his movies, they started using the phrase Denzelishness.
Yeah.
And I always credit them for that because I think it's such a great... when we talk about the cruisiest cruise, it's the same thing. It's like... And truly, we'll get into his Tony Scott movies probably a little bit later in the show, but I always think about the moment in Deja Vu when he walks in and he meets the other cops who are investigating what's going on. And he's like, who's in charge here? He asks the question, and so he's like, oh, that guy. He's like, where's the coffee pot? And some guy's like, oh, he's in charge. He knows where the coffee pot is.
Yeah,
he has this stupid little interaction where you're just like, why am I just wanting to be best friends with you?
You're getting out of a car from a 500-yard away camera in a Tommy Bahama shirt, and I'm captivated.
Yeah, he just he has this swagger, his Denzelishness that I think is almost really unmatched, and I feel like he uses so much of that in the later roles in his career to get by, and it gets movies made, and it gets us in butts and seats.
So, as a quick aside, have you seen how Ellen Pompeo has been trending recently?
Yes.
She bragged about this moment where she went off on Denzel when he was directing an episode of Grey's Anatomy.
Yeah.
So I guess there was this thing where an actor is saying, she's saying something at this, probably a day player actor, a co-star, guest star, and he's not looking her in the eye. And then Ellen Pompeo, not the actress, she's like, look me in the eye when I'm talking to you. Or no, she says that as Dr. Grey or whatever, improvising it, right? Yeah. And then Denzel goes, don't tell him what to do. I'm directing this. Yeah. And she goes, don't you fucking tell me what to do. This is my movie. You don't even know where or this is my show. You don't even know where the bathroom is on this set. And she's like, and then after that, we went on and everything was great. And that's just how it is when you have two really creative, passionate people in the same room. And I just wanted to be like, are you really bragging about shitting on Denzel Washington when he was directing an episode of Grey's Anatomy?
That's
like,
pretty
get
funny.
over yourself.
Ellen Pompeo, she like is referred to as that chick who's the lead of Grey's Anatomy. That's like her entire. That's like the only like distinction. And married to Harrison Ford. That's like it.
Oh, I like totally forgot that. I just think it's hilarious that she like bragged about that. So talking about Denzel
Oh, no,
Washington,
wait, that's Callista Flockhart.
I was just gonna say that's it's okay. We'll just edit it out. We won't. We're gonna leave it in. So in 2001, you and I are both 13 years old.
Yeah.
Denzel Washington has been around for a minute, but who was he to you at this point in your life?
Well, there was a period of time from about 95 to like 98 or 99 where I would go to the movies every week or every other week with my dad. And he loved just the stuff that he was into is the stuff that I'd go. So like if he liked an actor, we'd go. I saw a lot of De Niro stuff, a lot of Pacino stuff. And there was probably a good solid 4 or 5 Denzel movies that I went to see in theaters during that time. Mm-hmm. And so for me, and I don't think I ever did this, but like 13-year-old me, if you were to say like, who's the best black actor ever? I would probably just be like, well, it's Denzel Washington, right? Like, because like to me, he was just the ultimate, like noble, incredible, just badass. Like he seemed like the guy where I would go see all these, Tom Cruise or Brad Pitt, but they were all like just cookie cutter white guys, great actors. But he was the only guy other than Will Smith who arguably at the time was just as big, but he was like a young guy. He was like he was sort of like earning my attention. Yeah. Whereas Denzel felt like the elder statesman already at that point.
Well, it's funny because like even no matter which black actor you talk to over the last like 20 plus years, they always say the other guy is Denzel Washington, right? It's always Denzel, no matter who, if it's Will Smith, Chadwick Boseman, Michael B. Jordan, like it was just him
right
for so long in Hollywood. For me, I knew that he was a dude that worked. And I really liked Denzel Washington, but I hadn't really watched much of anything he'd done other than the things that had happened just right then, which was basically like Remember the Titans.
Yeah.
I saw Training Day, and there's one more in the 90s that I watched. Courage Under Fire was the other one. I don't remember why I watched that. I think my mom liked it. But I just remember him being like, okay, this guy's like, as a kid, I never latched on to directors or actors that much. I was just like, oh, this guy's good.
Yeah.
He's reliable. Like, I'll watch any movie that he's in because he seems super entertaining to me, which is crazy. This was 20 years ago. That's like the way that my mind worked. But like, I think I love Denzel Washington more than I knew I did at the time.
Well, totally. And that's, I think, going back to what I was saying a second ago, and any of that stuff about him being black, I don't think I realized at 13. I don't think I even thought about it until I got older and started recognizing the importance of diversity in film and actually learning that just white men weren't the only thing I should watch on screen. The culture started to catch up, and you look back and it's like, wow, I didn't even appreciate how incredible this one guy getting all the work. I'm not even talking about his good movies. I saw The Siege in theaters.
Yeah,
like
that's a good one.
You know what I mean? So I definitely think it's funny looking back, and then the next 20 years of his career up until now, it's like I think I've seen almost every movie he's ever done.
Yeah, and I've gone back and watched almost I'd say half the ones I missed because he has worked so much. I mean, he's got like 50 credits to his name. So who was he actually in 2001? Well, he was a 46-year-old man that had been married for 14 years, the love of his life, and they now have had 4 kids together, including one of them being John David Washington, which is it's one of those things I like forget all the time. I really like John David Washington. And he had just won his second Oscar, right? He just won his second Oscar after 5 nominations already in his relatively short career at this point, I guess.
Because the stuff that he does, when you talk about like the TV stuff, Soldier Story, Carbon Copy, most of that stuff retrospectively, like how we talk about Hardy and Bronson,
right?
That's stuff that people are aware of now. But it's Cry Freedom when he gets that first Oscar nomination for playing, like an activist. That's the one he like really gets on the radar. So it's really pretty much from 87 to 01 that he has. It's 14 years, 5 nominations, 2 wins. That's a really, really good sheet. And I think he establishes himself as kind of the guy and also one of the best actors of the decade.
And it's clear that based off of his career moving forward, that he's also got to just be like a consummate professional and a total badass, like just a great guy to work with. Because, we've heard the stories about like him confronting Tarantino on Crimson Tide, but then you also look at his career and you're like, well, you've worked with these 3 directors like so many times each. There must be a reason why Tony Scott and Spike Lee and Antoine Fuqua keep bringing you back, and that's just that he's got to just be a legend on set.
Yeah, it's really funny because I can remember in 2002, when he won the Training Day Oscar and Halle Berry won for Monsters Ball the same year. It was an iconic moment, right? Because it was the first time in history the 2 actors of color had both respectively won Best Actor and Best Actress at the Oscars. you go back to 1989, 12 years earlier, and Spike Lee is on the scene in a huge way with his release of Do the Right Thing, the very same year that Denzel wins his Oscar for Glory. And they hadn't even worked together yet. So a couple years later, it's Mo Better Blues. In the 90s, it's He Got Game. Then, it's early 90s, it's Malcolm X. So Spike and Denzel really kind of rose up through the 90s at the same time. Whereas like you talk about, there would sort of not have been a John Singleton if there wasn't Spike Lee first.
Right.
I think you talk about now a lot of the great actors of color that we have that lead films. I think a lot of them don't get that without the work Denzel puts in. And you talked about him being a consummate professional, going back to the same directors, the scripts that he picks, the types of films he wants to make. That's why his career is so varied. It's because he had such a clear idea of the kind of impact he wanted to have. I think he was aware of the impact that he was having.
I think so. Yeah, I mean, you look at all the roles that he played, and he was just breaking glass ceiling after glass ceiling after glass. Like, he was just paving the way, setting new boundaries all over the place for actors of color, because it was like, well, Denzel Washington can do it, so who gets to do it next?
Right.
So now that we've gotten all that, we know who he is, we talked about Training Day, now it's time to figure out the best and the worst of Denzel Washington. This is where you guys can get involved with the conversation. We've been loving reading your guys' reviews. Another thing that we love is you guys interacting with us, whether it's on Twitter, whether it's in YouTube comments. So if you're listening right now and you think you know or you have your opinion on the best and the worst of Denzel Washington, tweet at us. This is Ben Bateman Media. I'm Andrew Ghai. You can tag us at Team Action Show. You can leave us a comment on Action Industries on YouTube. And of course, if you want to throw in your rating or review, that is encouraged as well. And if you do leave us a review, we will shout you out on next week's episode, just like we're going to do at the end of this episode for last week's people that left us reviews. Next week, we're covering the best and the worst of Christopher Nolan in honor of the Prestige's anniversary. I'm excited. This is like, it's funny that you and I are going to get to cover Nolan and Fincher in like a month's time.
Yeah, for sure.
Because I think Nolan might be my favorite working director, and Fincher is your favorite.
They're two of the best around. They've defined this era. By the way, after we did the Fincher episode, I went back to rewatch Alien 3, because just like you guys who give us messages that, when you hear us talk about a movie, you want to go watch it. Well, sometimes when we talk about a movie that I haven't watched in a while, I go to rewatch it, and we talked about how bad it was. So I was like, I just want to revisit this one more time.
Maybe it's better than I thought.
It's just as bad as I remembered. It's like offensively bad, that movie. Like they make so many mistakes in that movie. I can't actually believe it exists. It's like it's awful. But anyway,
and they kill Newt at the very beginning, right? Isn't that what you're saying?
And they kill Michael Biehn.
Right.
I
forgot.
forgot.
Kill the two people that matter other than Ripley.
They're just dead.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's ridiculous.
That seems like a good device.
So, yeah, we are going to get into the best and the worst of Denzel Washington right now. Get excited, of course, for Christopher Nolan, the best and the worst. It'll be next week. You guys know, if you listen every week, on audio on the Apple Podcast app or on Spotify, you can listen to these episodes every single Tuesday. The following week, we put the video version of those episodes up on youtube.com/actionindustries. So if you're a video person, you want to watch it there, go check it out. But today, we are going to use cinema science. We're going to use all of these special rules that we've come up with to decide what's the best and what's the worst Denzel Washington film. We're going to go through first, what are the highest rated on Rotten Tomatoes by the critics, and also the lowest rated on Rotten Tomatoes from the critics, as well as IMDb.
You know, one of the highest rated things in the world is the best and the worst podcast in Singapore. The number 2 film and TV podcast in Singapore. So big shout out to you guys if you're listening from Singapore. Thank you so much.
Big shout out to Singapore.
Big shout out to Singapore. We love you. All right, so the best of Denzel, these are all based off of tomato meter scores on Rotten Tomatoes, not the IMDb and not the audience score. The best 3 movies in order. Number 1, Glory at 93%. Fences at number 2 at 92%. And Much Ado About Nothing at number 3 at 90%. And then the 3 worst movies, Ben, these are some good ones.
Yeah, the 3 worst coming in third worst, 29%. You got The Bone Collector. That's a travesty.
Love that movie.
23%, John Q.
I'm shocked that John Q is there.
Yo, John, you my hero, man. Thank you,
Good
Eddie.
Eddie.
Thank you. And of course, at 10%, you got Heart Condition. The odd thing about this is that while Glory has a 7.8 on IMDb as the highest rated, John Q has a 7.1.
Yeah.
So it's like, I feel like the reason that we don't establish the best and the worst based on these numbers is exactly this. If I was to walk up to somebody and say, Glory, Fences, and Much Ado About Nothing are the 3 best Denzel Washington movies, I think most people would slap me in the face.
They're like, oh, you know how to use Google, apparently.
Yeah.
And only one website, because between this, IMDb, Metacritic, and the audience scores on Rotten Tomatoes, it's just all over the board. So we're going to do it the way that we like to do it. We like to talk about approachability, visibility, rewatchability. We've come up with fun categories for that. And then, of course, when we actually decide the best and the worst, we talk expectation versus execution, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. So here we go. Talking about rewatchability. There's your once a year movie versus your never again movie. And I want to give a shout out to our producer PLD, who suggested that your never again movie is usually one of the worst movies as well when you do the best and the worst rankings. So our never again movie is actually going to be a good movie that we just don't want to watch again.
Yeah, I think it's a good way to do it. So I think this is hilarious to me because this, usually when we start with it with a once a year movie, this tends to just be, what are our two favorites?
Right.
It's like, usually what it represents is not necessarily they're going to be the best, but it's like the two that we like the most.
Yeah, because, I mean, when you talk about the once-a-year movie, when you actually think about all your favorite movies, all your favorite actors and directors, you probably only get a chance to watch that one of their movies every single year. And for me, it's Man on Fire.
Yeah.
I love Man on Fire. I think it's the best of Denzel working with Tony Scott. It's just grisly and violent enough to where I don't want to just like watch it once a month. It's like there's some pretty gnarly parts, like when he's cutting off the dude's fingers in the car, and then he like puts the cigarette lighter on there. Like it's
shoves
awesome.
the bomb in his ass.
Yeah, the bomb. All of it's just like pretty horrible. And then of course like it's like a pretty gut-wrenching movie. Like his relationship with Dakota Fanning is really sweet, and then him dying at the end, spoiler alert, is it's just not a movie that I want to watch super often, but it is my once-a-year movie.
I love Man on Fire. I really do. It was a movie that I had seen once before we covered it on AMA, and I think actually there's an old action movie Anatomy floating around from a long time ago that's got like a couple million views on it or something.
Definitely.
You can watch much younger, much thinner Ben and Drew talking about Man on Fire for an hour with our friend Jimmy Wong. But my once-a-year movie, and this has really evolved because I think over the years it would have just been one of the Tony Scott movies. I like so many of those movies so much more than most people.
Yeah, I'm shocked that's just not Taking a Pelham 1, 2, 3
Yeah, or like
for you.
Deja Vu.
Yeah.
Or, it's like I love those movies, even though I know they're not that great. The movie of his that I have found over the last few years I've watched the most times is actually Flight.
Really?
Yeah, it's the Zemeckis movie. Some people probably remember, some don't. It's a movie that I actually feel like over the last 10 years since its release has slowly but surely started to creep up on people's list. Because when I talked to, it's kind of like Warrior was, where you talk to someone and you mention the movie and you accept them and be like, oh yeah, I watched it once. To like, but it's like Warrior and like, dude, I love that movie. I feel like that's the relationship people have to Flight, because Denzel, if you guys don't know what the movie is, he plays an airline pilot who is flying for a major American airline. He's a complete alcoholic and drug addict. And he's flying a plane, hungover, still high, and the plane starts to go down. He flips the plane over, lands it on its head, basically, only loses like 2 passengers.
Right.
It's inspired by a real story where in the real story, they inverted the plane, everybody died. But
yeah, everyone died. It was still like a genius thing, and it wasn't anything to do with the pilot being an alcoholic or anything.
No, but in this version, Denzel really goes to a dark place. He goes to a place that we haven't probably seen him. I'd never seen him play a character like this before. It's the first time I'd ever seen it, and I guess what I like so much about this movie is...
It's funny because both of our picks have like a broken Denzel as the lead.
And we've talked a lot about that when he plays the guy that you feel like is a very flawed protagonist, that tends to be the best version of Denzel Washington.
You relate to him.
Yeah, so I find that whenever I rewatch Flight, I don't turn it off. It's like the movie that really keeps me engaged. John Goodman's great.
Yeah.
Cheadle's great.
Yeah, Goodman is really great.
Yeah, I really love that movie. So it's kind of a surprising pick, I think. But Man on Fire and Flight. So then the other side of this, you have the Never Again movie. As you mentioned, it's the film that you watch once, you really never want to watch it again, but it is a good movie.
Yeah, it's not the worst movie by any means, and I think that mine is a great example of exactly this. It's Glory. I'm really happy that I watched it. I went back this week and watched it. I knew that I needed to because of the performance that he gives. Him and Morgan Freeman are great. But I'll just tell you right now, I don't want to see this story being told by Edward Zwick through the lens of Matthew Broderick doing a very bad accent. That's the problem with it for me. Like, Morgan Freeman's great. The story is great. Denzel is incredible. Like, you see him early in the movie, and since he is such a young actor at this point, he's like a new guy on the block, you watch him and you're like, oh man, this kid has it.
Yeah.
Like, that's what everyone must have thought when they saw him in these movies at this time. And he does, but I just don't think it's actually that good of a movie. I mean, don't hate me, guys, but I'll be honest. Again, Zwick and Broderick kind of ruin it for me.
Glory's not my favorite either. You mentioned the accent. I
It's
remember
a bad
watching.
accent.
I remember watching Glory on an airplane like 2 or 3 years ago, and I remember it starts and you hear Broderick's accent in the voiceover, and you're just immediately like, oh no.
Yeah, you're just like, this is the movie that he and like, again, the scene that he wins. I mean, obviously he wins for the whole movie because he has a great arc in it, but there's like that scene, right? Like in Les Mis, there's I Dreamed a Dream, right?
Yeah,
That's the scene where you're like, okay, Hathaway's gonna take this. The scene when he's getting flogged for deserting is incredible, and I'm glad I watched it, but it's my never again movie. What's yours?
My Never Again movie is actually a film that's rated on a lot of people's list crazy high, and it's Fences. 2016
it's the number one movie on the list here.
Yeah. If you hit Fences and you look at kind of most people's opinion of the film, people really kind of revel in the impact this film had because Denzel directs it. He takes it's a play, stars in it. He and Viola Davis both do incredible jobs. She wins the Oscar for her part in this film. Denzel loses ultimately to Casey Affleck. It's really long. It's commendable that Denzel was able to make something written for the stage and make a great version. It's probably next to Flight, the other role in the last 10 years that you see him go to a place that's like really impressive.
What about Roman J. Israel?
I mean, he does try.
I don't know what I just did there, but
yeah, were you taking his hair or something?
I was doing his hair.
And I don't love Roman J, but I do feel like probably Fences is the other performance because he's a heartbreaker in this movie. He's really good in it. But it's very long. It's very boring. It took me 2 viewings to get most of the way through it. If you ask me what happens in the last hour, I probably couldn't actually tell you at this point.
Yeah.
I mean, I only finished it the one time, but that's got to be the one for me. I can't really think of many things to say about this movie that are good other than it's a tour de force from Denzel Washington and Viola Davis. They both kill it in this movie. It's about all I got, though.
But you just don't want to go back and watch it.
I never want to watch it.
You've done it. You can check it off your list. So next up, we have Approachability. This is your recommended movie versus your disclaimer movie. Let's go the other way this time. What's the movie that you have to give a disclaimer about? No. We'll go best and worst because that's the name of the show. We go best, we go worst. What is the movie that you recommend to everybody from Denzel?
This by far, this was the hardest one to pick. I had the hardest time picking this one.
This one is tough, yeah.
Because very much like we were talking about this a couple weeks ago, and I think we were talking about it with Fincher, you have to kind of think about what's the content you're putting in front of them. And while there are great films in Denzel's catalog, like Malcolm X, or there are amazing movies that he's done over the years, like whether you're talking about like Remember the Titans or I Love Flight, like there is something when you recommend a movie to anybody, just the field, you want something that is ultimately simple and very engaging.
Yes, and when we say recommend, we don't mean to your film critic friend or another film snob or even just someone who loves movies a whole lot. It could be someone that loves movies a lot, but this is also the person or the movie that you can recommend to the person at the grocery store, the person that does your hair, or whatever.
Yeah, for me, it's Unstoppable. It's Unstoppable, and the reason and I don't even think Unstoppable is my favorite of the Tony Scott like collabs. I just think Unstoppable is the tightest version of that Denzel performance. This movie doesn't have the sort of disturbing R-rated stuff that you have in Man on Fire.
Yep.
It's better and far more cohesive than either Deja Vu or Taking a Pelham 1, 2, 3. I mean, Crimson Tide's a great movie. I think it's wonderful.
A little dated.
Yeah, it is a little dated.
I love Crimson Tide.
But Denzel is kind of, we talk about his movie star charisma. The character in Unstoppable is pure walking movie star charisma. That's his whole performance in the movie. Chris Pine is a great young star to play off of him. Mm-hmm. This is one of Quentin Tarantino's 10 favorite films from the decade. He loves this movie.
This movie's got an 87% on Rotten Tomatoes, a 69 on Metacritic, a 6.8 on IMDb. It's based off of a true story. And like you said, it doesn't have that like grisly stuff that you get in some of the other movies. It is super approachable. It's funny, I kind of hated Unstoppable, but the more that I've gone back and like tried to give it a chance, I do actually really enjoy it. And I think what you're saying about it not being too long or taking itself too seriously is really important there. Mine almost feels kind of like a cop-out, but it's Remember the Titans. I don't know why it feels like a cop-out. Maybe it's because it's just like the most approachable movie he's probably ever done. It's like a Disney movie, I'm pretty sure. It's, it talks about race issues, but not so much that it would make people uncomfortable, I guess, is the best way to put it, because some people don't want to watch movies that are quote-unquote woke, which Remember the Titans came out at a time when I don't think we were quite there yet. It's a football movie. You get good drama between these young stars. You see some young stars on their way up. You have the heartbreaking moment with the linebackers, but you get them all coming together. Like, it's just a feel-good, fun family movie that is somewhat set in the real world. I just think it's a good movie that I don't think you can really go wrong with this movie.
It's really funny. If you go back to the 60s, even earlier, there are still movies that are making statements on racism. There's still movies being told from white directors with largely white casts that are trying to make points about racism, even as far back when racism was far worse in America. And I think the difference between those movies and I think now is that, like, as a culture, we recognize you really don't want those stories to be told by white directors or primarily have white casts.
Yeah.
Because it just feels like an inauthentic telling of a story that it's not really yours to tell. You know, it doesn't mean every movie has to be totally woke, but the reason Moonlight won Best Picture, the reason that movie is so beloved is because it feels incredibly authentic.
Yeah.
It's amazingly authentic, right? It's like everything about that movie, it incorporates so many pieces of a culture that, generally speaking, the people who vote in the Academy have never lived. They can't relate to at all. It's such a cultural divide. So when you talk about Remember the Titans, it's like, even 20 years ago, this is like the Disney version of commenting on racism.
Exactly.
And even 20 years later, this movie would be so much smarter than it is. It's a great movie. It's a great
exactly.
movie.
It would be a lot smarter. That's why it's like they pushed the envelope, I think, as much as they possibly could for the time. And just I'd say the time. So what's your disclaimer movie then?
Funnily enough, it's actually what I just talked about a second ago. It's also Flight.
Mine is also Man on Fire.
Well, okay, and I think we've almost kind of prefaced it as to why, but I'll jump first and just say, like, look, I've admitted many times I'm somebody who likes to drink, and so you know I can relate to Denzel when he's in like a haze of drunkenness. Like I can sort of and the way that he hates himself the next morning and he's kind of justifying his behavior. You know, I've had those moments in my life before. So when I watch this movie, there's a part, albeit a small part, because I mean he's way off the deep end. There's a small sliver of his character that I can relate to.
Same,
But that's not everybody. Like, if your friend who you recommend this to is somebody who wants to watch Remember the Titans and you recommend Flight,
or even they want to watch Training Day and you recommend Flight.
Flight's kind of a gut-wrenching sobriety story that like doesn't really appeal to everyone. Because I think we live in LA and we're surrounded by creative people, and creative people tend to really indulge. I could speak beyond my personal experience to so many friends in the industry who have struggled with addiction and abuse, you know, abuse of themselves, obviously their own behavior. That's, I think, when I watch Flight, it feels like he's a character that embodies so many pieces of people I've met in my life.
Yeah.
But if you don't live in Los Angeles, if you have a happy life that does not involve people that get fucked up all the time, this movie is a little outside your comfort zone.
Yeah, I completely agree. And the reason that I picked Man on Fire for my disclaimer movie is because there's a lot of other movies that Denzel does in his career that I think you do need to watch. And I wouldn't really put a disclaimer in front of them, right? Like, I'm not going to really put a disclaimer in front of Glory or Malcolm X or those types of films, or even any of the Tony Scott movies other than this one, because it's like, it doesn't quite feel like, some of them it feels like you have to watch, and then the other ones it's like, well, if you turn on Taking a Pelham 1, 2, 3, you deserve to watch Taking a Pelham 1, 2, 3. Man on Fire is one where you might turn it on and think it's one thing and get another thing. I love it. I think that, like we just said before, though, it's a little intense. It's definitely dark. It's a little depressing. It's maybe a little more violent or gratuitous than you'd like. And at the end of the day, even though he's awesome in it, you walk away from a movie where Denzel dies, the girl gets away, and you're kind of like, you're just kind of sad.
Yeah.
So I think it's like, how would I disclaim this movie? It would probably just be like, if you want to watch kind of an intense, dark action drama that is really good, but it might make you cringe a couple times.
Well, the hilarious part of Man on Fire is that it has two distinct pieces. You have stuff like Christopher Walken being like, well, Crease is an artist.
Right.
He's like, his art is death. Or something like that. He's about to paint his masterpiece.
I like forgot about that.
Yeah, like you have lines like that where like anybody would enjoy that because it's like so popcorn.
Creasy's art is death. He's about to paint his masterpiece.
But then you also have stuff that's like incredibly dark with like Denzel getting in the pool and the blood coming out of his bandages and him just floating and like so obviously wanting to die. The goodbye on the, I mean, there's stuff in that movie that when I watch it will always make me cry. Mm-hmm. His relationship to Dakota Fanning in that movie is so good.
He's your Creasy Bear.
Yeah, it's the best.
Yeah, I really do love that movie. So now on to the last one, which is Visibility. There's the lied about seeing. Oh yeah, no, I've definitely seen that movie. And then there's the, oh yeah, that movie, the one that you completely forget exists. This time, let's go back to front. What's the movie that you just forget exists?
So this is almost the same reason that I chose The Game on our David Fincher episode. It's this movie Fallen. Do you remember the movie Fallen?
I remember it because I watched it today.
Yes! You had never seen it, though.
I'd never seen it, and if I had, I don't remember. It's pretty damn bad.
So there's this category of movie that you guys have heard me talk about on all of our shows for years, where it's the It's like Saturday night. You've gotten home. It's midnight. You got a few drinks in you. You don't quite want to go to bed yet, so you turn something on.
Some trashy 90s thriller.
You probably make it through the majority of the movie, but you might nod off and wake back up during the movie a couple times.
Yeah.
That's Fallen.
That is Fallen.
And there's a lot of movies in the category, but the reason I bring it up is because it's literally my favorite category of movie. Trashy 90s thriller starring Denzel Washington. This is the movie, by the way, if anybody doesn't know, the gif of Denzel grabbing his chest, being like, where you're like, thank God such and such is alive, I'm relieved. Yeah. Like that's where it's from. And so I just think it's funny that like Fallen is totally that movie that I think most people don't realize that they love Bone Collector, but they have no idea that Fallen even happened.
Yeah. Fallen, God, I mean, between the camera trick of like the spirit going from one person to another and the amount of times that you hear that time is on my side, like I think they sing it like 50 times in that movie. Yeah. It's a pretty rough one. That's a good pick for the movie you forget exists, because The Bone Collector is the far superior of the two.
It's the far superior 90s thriller.
And I guess maybe I'll watch Ricochet tonight just because I don't like. Why not?
I've never watched
remember
Ricochet.
It. Yeah. For me, the one that I forget existed it's The Magnificent Seven.
Oh, a Fuqua remake.
Yeah. Yes, our boy Antoine Fuqua. I think what's so interesting about this one for me is that like the cast is absolutely stacked.
Yeah. D'Onofrio's voice is incredible.
It is. I actually liked this movie.
Yeah, me too.
I remember enjoying myself when I watched it. I've never watched it again. I've never thought about watching it again. And I'll be honest, until we started talking Denzel last week, I think I just forgot it existed. Isn't Peter Skarsgård the bad guy in that movie?
Yeah, that sounds right. Yeah, he comes to town. He wants to like.
It's a sweet death, I think, at the end. But yeah, I just like.
Yeah, Pratt in there.
Yeah, Pratt's like, and Pratt he's like a sweet character. He goes out in a really awesome way.
Totally.
I think it was good that they did something different with him and kind of what you expected. But yeah, I actually really like this movie. I just don't ever remember it existing.
Yeah, I don't remember the rest of the characters very well. We saw this in theaters and reviewed it, I remember, on our show a long time ago.
Yeah, we did an AMA on it.
Yeah, and, for Denzel, some directors, some franchises, some actors are going to have, like, the standard. If we ever talk Star Wars, it's like, how is the one you have lied about not having seen not just going to be, like, Empire? It's like, there's just a certain...
Right.
There's going to, like, be certain ones where it's just a slam dunk. And I think for Denzel...
So, hold on, because I want to bury the lead here. Or, I mean, I don't want you to bury the lead. So I know, what are the other movies that would probably come up, right? Like, Training Day would be one. Titans. For some reason, I feel like Glory would, just because he won his Oscar for it.
Yeah, those are probably the biggest ones. I think like if you go into like the 2000s, some people have like a real soft spot for like American Gangster.
Yeah, that's true. A lot of people like Inside Man a lot. Yeah, another Spike Lee movie.
Yep, I would agree with that. But I just don't think it's even close.
Yeah, it's not, and we have the same choice for that reason. It's just Malcolm X.
It's Malcolm X because like I think when you talk about some of the ultimate Oscar travesties, Denzel losing to Al Pacino for Son of a Woman in 1992, it's got to be on the top of the list. I think there's like a great interview.
It like makes me sick thinking about it.
There's like a great interview where you hear Denzel talking about it after the fact.
Yeah,
and he's like talking about how important it was to him to play Malcolm X, and he's like, up against. That he like says something like that.
Yes,
I can't remember like where I read it or heard it. He like makes some extremely dismissive comment where it's just like fucking Al Pacino saying "Hoo-ah" is what I lost to for playing this iconic person.
It's it's a true epic. It's like 3.5 hours. It has numerous different acts of the movie, numerous different characters for him to play. You have him before he goes to jail, him in jail, and him out of jail, and once he joins the Nation of Islam. And they're really 3 different people.
Yeah.
And you see him do things in this movie that I don't think I've ever seen him do before. There's the vulnerability, there's the stubbornness, there's kind of like the ignorance. There's all these things that he plays so well. In that hair, man. That hair at the beginning of the movie.
Yeah.
The straightened hair is just incredible. But yeah, I agree 100%. This is the movie that, honestly, I was this guy that kind of had to lie about seeing Malcolm X. I think I'd turned it on a couple times in my life, but I'd never sat and watched the full 3.5 hours until this week. And it is without a doubt his movie you have to lie about not seeing, because it is his career-defining role.
I saw it on an airplane 2 years ago and I was happy that I watched it. Because like Delroy Lindo's in it, right? Isn't he play? I was making sure that I was mixing up movies. Well. Spike Lee has a pretty big role as well as an actor in this movie. Angela Bassett. Yeah, it's a big one. It's a deep cast, and definitely one of those movies that it's too long for me to really want to ever go rewatch it at this point. But I definitely appreciated what I watched while I was watching it.
Mm-hmm.
made a huge
Yeah, I mean,
impact.
it was almost my Never Again movie, but I do think it's so much better than Glory, and I think it is like a movie that if someone to me in like 10 years or maybe, and this is like knock on wood, but like maybe when Denzel passes, they'd be like, we should go watch Malcolm X. I'd be like, goddamn right we should.
Yeah,
it's incredible.
It'll have a huge surge. So we're going to get to the best and the worst in just a quick second here, guys. A couple things that we do want to shout out. If you're on YouTube and you've never checked out our account, go to youtube.com/actionindustries. We're always doing trailer reviews and live streams and all kinds of stuff on there. You can also watch the video version of this podcast. And secondly, I'm hitting the road, going on tour. My first music tour. I'm a musician, if you guys didn't know that. For a couple songs out on Spotify. Tickets for sale at benbateman2021tour.com. They're all going to be kind of like one-on-one hangouts where I'm just getting to meet everybody. So if you're listening to this and you want to meet up and see a live show, check it out. I'm really excited about doing it. And I think without further ado, let's get to the best and the worst.
All right, so let's go to the worst first. We always love going from bottom to top. The third worst film. So not his absolute worst, not the second to worst, but the third worst film is the one that we just talked about. It's Fallen, baby.
Yeah. It's like this movie was free streaming on like 3 different services over the last 5 years.
They're just like, please God, someone watch this.
It was always switching, and like I would see it on like Showtime or it'd be on HBO, and I always would be like, why have I never watched this movie? And then of course I had the experience I talked about, and like I couldn't tell you much about it, but I will go back. Have you ever heard of the film Twisted? No, I will go back and rewatch like any number of bad 90s, like murder mystery, erotic thriller, everything circling that genre.
Yep.
I just did a square when I said circle.
It was good. We saw it.
Literally anything I will watch. And I've never had any inkling to ever go back and rewatch Fallen. Like,
yeah, and like, you know, expectation versus execution is a big part of how we come up with this 6, the bottom 3 and the top 3, and that's basically like what we're told this movie's going to be and like what we actually felt when we finished watching it. This has got Donald Sutherland, James Gandolfini, John Goodman, and Denzel Washington in a murder mystery thriller in what felt like the perfect time to do it.
It's not 88, it's 98. This is the same year as he got Game. This is like a year before the hurricane. This is right around the time that he starts to become icon Denzel Washington. This should have been a movie that went down as like a really sweet thriller. Like,
yeah, and that didn't even have to be like a great movie, but it was just like, it was just bad, and it just like goes, it's the same thing over and over. The spirit of Azazel travels from one person to another, and then they sing the song so you know they're possessed, and in the end of the movie, Denzel kills himself to kill the angel or demon, but then it possesses a cat.
Yeah,
and
right.
that's how it ends. And you're like, cool. Thank God.
Fallen 2.
Fallen 2.
Starring a cat.
Puss in Boots. All right, so the second to worst, the penultimate, as Mark Ellis would say, is going to be Virtuosity.
The thriller we didn't even mention.
We didn't even talk about this movie once throughout the entire show.
So here's the thing about Virtuosity. There's a category of movie from the 90s where they were trying to use like computer generated technology, and at the time they were like really going for it. But when you go back to rewatch them, they've aged so badly. The effects look so awful. That's number one. Number two, Russell Crowe as the villain in this movie is going for it. He's like really going for it.
He is unwatchably bad in this movie.
Awful.
Like you the first few times you see him, you're like, oh, okay, this is kind of hilarious, but then you're just like, just stop. And there's that whole part of like the orchestra of screaming in the club or whatever that just goes on forever. It's just a horrible movie that I don't think it could have been good when it came out. It's aged terribly, and I think if we were doing the best and the worst of Russell Crowe, this would be number one. It's got to be his worst performance I've ever seen.
Can't change what I am, Daryl.
I'm a 50 terabyte self-evolving neural network double backflip off the high platform. I'm not a swan dive. And I have to tell you, killing for real, it was a real rush. Oh my God. Which God would that be? The one who created you, or the one who created me?
Close to it. Yeah, I'd have to think what the hell else we're forgetting. There's some pretty bad ones in there, but yeah, this movie is really awful. It's like right in the exact same category as Fallen for me. Yeah. I don't think it was the 12 o'clock version. It might have been the like 9 or 10 o'clock version where I'm just like getting tired and put it on, but I definitely finished the whole movie.
Yeah, but you probably don't even remember it because it's so just weird.
It's just by the numbers. Again, this is a thriller. This is a mid-90s thriller with 2 great actors, both Oscar winners. This movie should be good.
Right? And then you talk about, the talent in the movie that we just mentioned in Fallen with Gandolfini, Goodman, and Sutherland. Like, those are greats right there. And then you talk about Oscar winners. This is the true definition of expectation versus execution. Our number 1 worst movie of Denzel Washington is...
The Little Things.
It's so bad.
If you guys haven't watched The Little Things, don't watch The Little Things. It's really it's really bad. Denzel got like 50 million or like 40 million or something like that to launch HBO Max's exclusive deal. This was supposed to be one of the launch movies. Jared Leto wears a fat suit
for no reason
to have a gut for no reason at all. It has nothing to do with his character. He has this weird like waddle. It's very strange.
But then you look at like, what is it, Chapter 23 and House of Gucci?
Yeah.
And it's like, I mean, I don't know if he actually gained the weight for House of Gucci. I'm not sure if it's
I'm
another
not sure,
suit
but
or
I know
not.
that he's gained so much weight for Chapter 23 that he like got a case of the gout.
Yeah. Look, I don't want Jared Leto to get the gout, but like, the reason he gained weight for those roles, these other ones, at least I'm assuming because I haven't seen House of Gucci yet, is because they're historically accurate to the characters that they're playing, whereas this just was just because.
This
like,
was
hey, Jared, put this on. All right, leave it on.
I think there's also something to be said for the fact that all 3 of our films are like either like thriller or mystery, and they all involve murder because like there's obviously those are projects that Denzel's attracted to, but also those are the types of movies that when you talk about expectation versus execution, we're not alone in loving trashy thrillers. That's like the world loves trashy thrillers. So The Little Things is just that movie where honestly it's like they wrote a script on Rami Malek too.
I was just gonna say there's 3 Oscar winners leading this movie.
They wrote a script for this movie that I guess they must have shot and had to cut around it because by the end of the movie, it's not even entirely clear what happened. It's like kind of clear. The reveal at the end is so stupid that you're like...
Right? Like he actually killed someone and he's felt bad for it his whole life or something?
I feel like what it is like what ends up happening is that the thing that Denzel was like haunting him his whole career, Rami ends up doing, and to like absolve him of the guilt that Denzel carries around, he like makes up something and sends him like something in an envelope,
right, to make him feel like he didn't do it,
so that he can carry all the guilt. I think like that's how it ends, but it's such an unsatisfying piece of garbage that like it's just definitely the worst.
I wish that he took Meryl Streep's line from Doubt. I have doubts. I wish that was in The Little Things because it feels like it would have been really appropriate. All right, let's get on to the best. Our 3rd best movie from Denzel Washington. And I think this is kind of I think this top 3 is a bit of a hot take.
Definitely.
Number 3, which is usually unanimously number 1.
Yeah.
For us is Malcolm X.
Yeah, I mean, Malcolm X it's the OG, it's the standard, it's for the longest time, has been the role that everybody points to when they want to establish just how incredible of an actor Denzel is. We've already said enough about it, I think. It's a movie that had an enormous impact in its time, but it's also considered to be a classic. At the Arrow near where I live, they just showed this like about a month ago. This movie lives on. People love this movie. And his portrayal of Malcolm X, it is the most iconic character that he ever played in a movie because it's so famous and because it's such an important part of his legacy. It's weird when you look back at the way that the Oscars define people's legacies. Denzel's lucky enough to have 2 others and not had to win for this.
He should have won for this.
He should have won.
It is by far and away, I think, his most breathtaking and powerful and nuanced performance that he does. Like, I think of who he is at the beginning of the movie and who he is at the end of the movie. I think the reason it's not number 1 for us is it is very, very long. And I think anytime you get a movie that's that long... Now, don't get me wrong. I think it's really important that they show who he was before, who he was growing up, who he was in prison, and who he was afterwards. I just think that there's probably a way to make this movie 245 instead of 322, I think. And I think that would really make it just a little bit more palatable. And otherwise, I think, again, this is just about favoritism at this point, right? Like, I think we can both agree it's probably his best performance, period, but that doesn't mean it's the best movie he's ever been in, according to us.
No, I definitely appreciated it, and this is not our favorite and our least favorite. So we have to combine what we like versus what we know is acknowledged by the world, and this is an incredibly important movie. Coming up next, number 2, hilariously enough, we're gonna put our words in our mouth here.
I know.
It's Man on Fire.
Yeah, right. It almost feels wrong to say that it's number 2 after just talking about Malcolm X and placing that below. But I think for me, Man on Fire, I think it's the best of Tony Scott and Denzel working together. I think him and Dakota Fanning's relationship is absolutely incredible and heartbreaking. I think you get the thing that we talked about at the beginning of the movie, or I mean, the beginning of the show, which is He's got that movie star charisma through and through. You're rooting for him. He is a faltered, kind of broken down hero. He's a guy that, you don't really want to be him, but you want to watch him exist. And then it's him being a badass also, like straight up.
Yeah, I mean, he just does a great job in the movie overall. It's when you talk about Denzelishness and like him being able to do both things, why our thesis statement was what it was, the combination of acting talent and movie star charisma, Man on Fire kind of embodies exactly that. He doesn't do that much as this character. He doesn't have to do that much. He's not even asked to play a character that has like such obvious moments of like, oh, he's hurting or he's angry. He's really asked to play a character that's just like full of guilt and shame
and
rage.
Yeah.
And he gets to be all of the Denzelishness that we'd ever want, but he also gets to, in the moments that we need him to, flex the acting chops.
Which is incredible, the amount of work that him and Dakota Fanning do in the short amount of screen time that they have at the beginning of the movie and at the very, very end. And I think that's why it's our number 2. Our number 1 movie, and this is definitely, I think, the hottest of the takes of all 3. Our number 1 movie.
It's Flight. Guys, I swear to God, it wasn't me just pulling the strings here.
It was him.
Remember when I used that example a second ago of this is that movie that you thought you really liked that no one else liked? Then you talk to someone and it turns out they're like, yeah, actually, I think that movie's really great too. That was our conversation.
Yeah.
I didn't think you liked this movie nearly as much as I did. I thought you sort of appreciated it, but it was like a shrug of the shoulders.
I think the first time I watched this movie, I was in a pretty dark place and it almost hit too close to home. When I've watched it more over the last couple of years, I think what's interesting about this movie is it's kind of just like it's going to be crazy to say, it's kind of a fun, feel-good movie at certain parts.
Yeah.
And then it's super dark, depraved, and depressing at others. But I love that up and down that you get. I think I love that it goes all the way across the spectrum. You get him being cool and awesome, but you get him being broken. You get him in Goodman. Goodman's like great comic relief. The movie ends kind of sad. I mean, kind of bleak, if you will, but it's also kind of awesome.
Because this movie also has a lot of things that I think when people think like intense addiction drama, they don't actually realize. Number 1, the opening of the film, the first 15 minutes when the plane's going down, that's an epic scene.
It's really well done.
It's so good.
It's so intense.
Him.
Oh God, the flight attendants that die, like hitting and trying to save the kids.
And the one woman, and he's like, she's like, tell your son Trevor you love him, and she says it, that thing, because like things are going down, but it all starts with him getting it on and sitting down and taking a hit of oxygen, like offering it to the co-pilot.
And the guy's like, no.
It goes down, and then like the way that he responds once he's awake, and he goes and he dumps all of the booze in the drain, but then of course he just gets hammered again.
Yep.
It's like there's so many things.
The moment that he has with the co-pilot and his wife in the hospital room, but then he's like, you think they're going to sell him out, but then they don't, because he's like, I believe this is what should have happened that day.
Yeah.
There's so many parts of this that are, it's such a movie, right? Like it's so fantastic and not real, but also it has so many great real moments in it that you really can connect to and you really relate to.
I mean, Zemeckis, right? Like Zemeckis doesn't only make good movies. He's made a lot of pieces of crap. Like a couple years after this, he makes Welcome to Marwan, and his career is littered with bad movies. But sometimes, like when in the case of Forrest Gump or something, or Back to the Future, you'll get a movie where it's like he just knows exactly what he wants to do. And I think that this movie, the reason that this movie is what it is, I think kind of the reason this movie is a hot take at number 1 is because it was sold to most people as this airplane pilot. In the trailer, he says, I'm drunk right now. I think people wanted that story, and what they didn't realize is they were going to be watching kind of an intense addiction drama.
I drank the vodka bottles on the plane.
Captain Whitaker, on the 3 nights before the accident, October 11th.
October 11th, October 12th, and 13th, and 14th, I was intoxicated. I drank all of those days. I drank in excess.
On the morning of the accident.
I was drunk. I'm drunk now.
Yeah. So I think that when it came out, some people recognized it. He was nominated for an Oscar for this movie.
Yep.
But I think a lot of the people that sort of wanted more of Unstoppable with an alcoholic pilot didn't get that movie. Yeah. They got something that was a little bit harder to watch. And I think over the years, you and I have talked about this before. I think for one episode, we were going to do something about like best like addiction movies or something, I think. And I remember us like kind of trying to figure out like, what are they? Mm-hmm. And this movie is so close to the top. There's not that many.
The Requiem, The Way Back.
Yeah, the really good ones are pretty few and far between, where it feels like it actually captures something really organic. And that's what they do with this movie. So to me, it's such an important movie for that reason exactly.
Yeah, and that's our number one. So best to worst: Flight, Man on Fire, Malcolm X, Fallen, Virtuosity, and The Little Things. Those are our 3 best and our 3 worst in that order. Let us know what you think about those, of course, in the comments or in your reviews. So next up, before we finish out the show, man, is what's left for Denzel Washington.
You know, there was a rumor going around like a year or two ago that in the MCU reboot involving the X-Men that he was going to play Magneto. Remember that?
Yeah,
and
of course I remember that.
And there were some mock-ups of him going around like in the outfit. And I got to say, if it's not Magneto, you know, if it was Doctor Doom, like I would love to see Denzel be cast as the right supervillain in a superhero property. Like Brolin as Thanos, if you give me a Denzel level character like that,
that would be so amazing.
Right? Like, because think about how Josh Brolin is going to be forever immortalized in our minds as Thanos now. It's going to stand above anything else he ever did in the rest of his whole career. There's no question, if I think about No Country, if I think about all the other things I've liked him in, it will never compare to Thanos because it was so epic and had so much weight because of those movies. If Denzel got a character like that, which I think he's one of the few actors that I would trust that could actually do it, it would be just unreal.
Yeah, you know, and then for me, I really feel like Denzel will win a 3rd Oscar.
Yeah.
And I think it could be for acting or directing. Either one. I mean, I know Fences was kind of like his greatest accomplishment in directing so far. Yeah. For me, though, I would love to see him not go back to what he was doing in the 80s and 90s and not go back to what he was doing in the early 2000s, but maybe to take a step forward in his career and kind of maybe marry all of his great abilities or all of his different... I'm trying to figure out exactly how to put this into words, but like, I want to see him do something a little bit different but it doesn't need to be new. It can literally just be kind of things that he's done in the past, like parts of these great characters, and put him into something else. But I want Denzel to continue acting. I'd love to see him as like the haggard, old, like angry guy that you end up winning over, or just like a badass, something like that. I want to see him being a sweet, grizzled old man.
There's a decent chance that he is going to win the Oscar this next year for the tragedy Macbeth. Yeah. The reviews coming in from the festivals already is that it has 100% on Tomatoes right now. People are saying amazing things about it. So it's very possible that this ends up being his 3rd Oscar. And it also is very cool because it feels like he's pushing and doing something we haven't seen. I don't really want the Equalizer 3. No. I don't really want that part of his career to keep going. He's in his mid-60s. I want the Paul Newman Color of Money part of his career to happen.
Yes.
I want the like, I'm an older guy and I'm a grandfather. I want him to be playing those real characters. You look at Anthony Hopkins in The Father, and he's older than Denzel, but like there's a lot of meat on the bone for scripts that are talking about characters that are older that I think Denzel has done so much in his career. I would love to see him do that, or maybe a comedy.
I would love to see him work with a lot of the young, great colored stars out there, whether it's brown people like me or whether it's other black actors out there. There's so many great POCs out there getting good roles that are kind of blowing up in the world. I'd love to see him paired with people like that. We've seen him paired with other superstars throughout his career time and time again. I mean, we didn't even talk about Two Guns and Safe House, where he's paired with Reynolds and Wahlberg, like 2 of the biggest stars in the world. I want to see him paired with people like, I mean, hell, maybe even his son. That'd be cool. Michael B. Jordan. That'd be cool. Like Mahershala Ali. I'd love to see the 2 of them on screen together. I'd love to see that.
Jonathan Majors or something like that.
Yeah, I'm so glad you said Jonathan Majors, because I was thinking about supervillain and all that, and I love what he did at the end of Loki. So do you think that he ever does comedy or no?
That's what I was just saying. I think that's the other thing I'd love to see him do, but the problem is I don't know if he can.
I don't either. I feel like maybe he can't do it. What if he does like a Statham thing?
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
That's exactly what I was thinking. Yeah. If he took himself so seriously...
or improvisational comedy, like a Liam Neeson thing.
Because I remember when we saw Equalizer 2, and he has that scene where he goes to get the kid out of the drug house or whatever.
Yeah.
And the kid's like, "You don't know me, Mr. McCall," and he's like, "Man, it's not spelled G-U-N. You know what you got, killer? What you got, son?" And he goes at him. You know, it's like so amazing, and he just does it for like a minute, and it's like he like turns on the Denzel switch for just a second.
Yeah.
And so I think because that exists, I would love to see like a comedy where he kind of like JCVD or something like that, where he is able to fully poke fun at himself, but I don't know if he does, because I feel like he takes himself so seriously.
And I feel like that's part of maybe his brand. So maybe that's why he's never done it.
What do you see when you look at me? Tell me. You better give me a right answer to what you see when you look at me. Killer, what you see, yummy? You don't know.
Oh no. Oh no.
Man ain't spelled G-U-N, son. You got a choice.
All right, last thing here is buy or sell. Do we even need to have this conversation? It's Denzel Washington.
Buying, yeah.
Yeah, there's no way you sell Denzel Washington. He's just too much of the greatest with too much promise left in his career, even though he's 66 years old. So guys, that's going to do it for the best and the worst of Denzel Washington. Let us know what you think about it. You can let us know in the comments, but what we love are when you guys leave us ratings and reviews, and we have 2 brand new reviews. One from Wheel Joe, it looks like, and the other one from, I'll let you take this one.
I'm blind.
Del Spoonerino.
Del Spoonerino. It's a wonderful throwback to iRobot. Great reviews. It's nice to see more reviews and ratings coming in on the app. We've been getting some, different statistics coming in from Chartable.
We're number 2 in Singapore.
It's sick. It's sick. As far as TV and film podcasts, it's nice to see that we're getting some traction. People are commenting and really enjoying the show so far, and that really warms our heart. And we're climbing up. We're inside, almost inside the top 100 in the U.S. already with this show for TV and film, which is great. I mean, that's pretty cool. It's been around for 5 weeks.
This is our 5th episode. Yeah.
Everybody has a podcast, so I think we're pretty thrilled about that. So thank you guys so much for supporting the show and leaving those reviews and those comments. If you are listening right now, we will shout you out if you leave one. Go and just check it out on the podcasts app. Write a quick review. It really does mean a lot to us.
Yeah, for Ben Bateman, I am Andrew Ghai. This is the best and the worst of Denzel Washington, and we'll see you next week for Christopher Nolan.
Thanks, guys.
Bye. All right, a big time shout out to our generals in our Patreon. Patreon.com/Team Action is the best way to support us in what we're doing. And this is also a great place to get in on the conversation. Before we tape these episodes, we talk to our generals in the Action Army about their ideas of what makes a great martial artist, what makes a great Ryan Gosling film, and next week, what makes the best or the worst David Fincher film. And we'll start with Call Sign Kilmer, Quiz Show, Ripper, Demon King, Excalibur, Caddyshack, The Chosen One, Public Enemy #1, Kaiju, ACP, Freedom, Robin, Kimura, Moses, Galactus, Bartab, Party J, Congo, The Gray, Phantom, Deja Vu,
24601. Call sign #Ladies Night, Ladies Man, JFTB, Wonderland, Quinn, Brosnan, Desperado, Outback, Da Vinci, The Slap, Entrapment, Stamos, Dante's Peak, Director, Top Gun, and Gundam, plus all of our past generals. A big time salute to you guys, and thank you so much for supporting the best and the worst. See you guys next week.